There are 30 NBA franchises. The least valuable is worth $3.5 billion. The most valuable is under a signed $12.5 billion sale agreement, the largest transaction in North American sports history. Reports say the deal came together in a matter of days. The money is committed, the paperwork is signed. Josh Kushner and Bob Iger do not own the Los Angeles Lakers because in the NBA, signing the agreement is not the same as owning the team. 7 levels. One question underneath all of them. What does owning an NBA franchise actually mean? Level 1. The passive investor. Since 2020, institutional funds have been allowed to buy minority stakes in NBA teams. Up to 20% per franchise, up to 30% of a team's equity combined. These are purely financial positions. No governance rights, no vote, no say in who gets drafted, hired, or fired. Even 1% of the league's cheapest franchise runs roughly $35 million. You can spend tens of millions becoming an NBA owner and have exactly the same say in team decisions as someone who bought a jersey. At level 1, you own something. You control nothing. At level 2, the stakes get serious enough that control starts to matter. A little. Level 2. The strategic minority. Josh Kushner held minority stakes in the Grizzlies and the Heat years before he ever agreed to buy the Lakers. Those stakes bought relationships inside NBA ownership circles. They didn't buy control of anything. Here's the better example. In 2021, Mark Walter and Todd Boehly bought a 27% stake in the Lakers. Just a minority position, until you notice what came attached to it. Buried in that deal was a right of first refusal on Lakers shares. 4 years later, when the Buss family finally sold control, that clause put Walter first in line. The minority stake wasn't the asset. The paperwork inside it was. At level 2, the money is real, the position is significant, and control still belongs to someone else. At level 3, you finally get a formal seat in the room. Sort of. Level 3, the alternate. Level 3 introduces a new title, alternate governor. The NBA Constitution allows every franchise up to 3 of them. It sounds like real authority. It isn't automatically. A governor has full power to bind the franchise with a vote at league level. An alternate can act only when authorized to. The title describes a backup role, not a rank. Mark Cuban is about to find out exactly how big that distinction can get. Up to this point, this has looked like a money question. How much does it cost to own an NBA team? The answer, at every level, is more than you think. But something shifts here. Mark Cuban built the Dallas Mavericks into a championship franchise. He owned them for 23 years. In 2023, he sold the controlling interest to the Adelson and Dumont families. He kept 27% of the franchise. He became alternate governor. He said publicly, "Nothing really changes except my bank account." It changed. ESPN later reported there was no contractual language giving Cuban continued control of basketball operations. The person the NBA recognized as governor was Patrick Dumont. Cuban still owns hundreds of millions of dollars of the Dallas Mavericks. He is no longer the person the league calls when Dallas needs to cast a vote. From here, the question stops being how much you own. It becomes whether you control what you paid for. Level 4. The entry-level governor. $3.5 billion is the floor. That's Forbes' valuation for the league's least valuable franchise. Not a discount team. One of the 30 most valuable sports properties on Earth. To actually control it, you need more than a check. The NBA Constitution requires a formal investigation, a $50,000 processing deposit, and a vote from at least 3/4 of the league's governors, 23 out of 30, before your purchase legally exists. Minnesota shows how gradual this can be. Mark Lore and Alex Rodriguez spent 4 years as limited partners before receiving unanimous approval for full control in 2025. Lore taking the governor title, Rodriguez becoming his alternate. At level 4, you finally are the governor. One vote on the board, hiring and firing authority, the person the league actually calls. But you bought your way into a system that can still say no. Level 5, same vote, different universe. At level 5, control stops getting bigger. The size of what it sits on top of does. One team, one vote. Whether you run the Mavericks at $3.5 billion or the Celtics at $6.1 billion, the formal power is identical. Boston sold in 2025 to a group led by Bill Chisholm at a valuation above $6.1 billion, with the deal structured to reach as high as $7.3 billion by 2028. The same Celtics ownership group that bought the team for $360 million in 2002. A Memphis governor and a Boston governor cast the identical vote in the identical room. Nearly $3 billion in enterprise value separates what that vote is actually sitting on top of. At level 6, the asset stops being just a basketball team and starts becoming a platform. Level 6, the platform. The Warriors are valued at $11 billion. Joe Lacob and Peter Guber bought the team for $450 million in 2010. Golden State generates roughly $880 million a year, more than double the league's $417 million average. Same governor's vote as every other franchise, a completely different commercial machine attached to it. The Knicks tell a stranger version of the same story. James Dolan governs through a publicly traded company, Madison Square Garden Sports, meaning ordinary investors can buy shares connected to the Knicks without owning one particle of actual NBA governance. Economic exposure spreads out to the public. Control stays locked to one man. At level 7, someone agreed to pay more than any franchise in history has ever sold for, and they still don't have it. Level 7, the Lakers. Jerry Buss bought the Lakers, the Kings, and the Forum in 1979 for $67.5 million total, with roughly $16 million of that attributed to the Lakers alone. Mark Walter bought controlling interest in 2025 at a $10 billion valuation, unanimously approved by the NBA. 14 months later, he agreed to sell that same control to Josh Kushner and Bob Iger for $12.5 billion, reportedly finalized in a matter of days. Modern sports acquisitions like this typically involve entire ownership consortiums and outside capital behind the named buyers, not two men writing a personal check for the full enterprise value. The Board of Governors hasn't voted yet. The next meeting is reported for September. 23 of 30 governors have to say yes before any of this is real. And there's a complication the money can't touch. When Walter bought control, the Buss family kept 17%, just enough under NBA rules, to let Jeannie Buss remain governor, despite no longer holding the economic majority. Now her siblings want to sell the family's remaining 17.8% stake to Kushner and Iger. If that sale goes through, Jeannie drops below the ownership threshold and loses the role she's held since her father died in 2013. She's fighting the sale in court as a co-trustee of the family trust. Right now, simultaneously, the sale is agreed, but not approved. The governor's own family is divided over whether to end her tenure. The league hasn't voted. And as of this recording, the people who agreed to pay a record $12.5 billion still do not actually own the Los Angeles Lakers. Jerry Buss bought the Lakers for $16 million. Josh Kushner and Bob Iger agreed to pay $12.5 billion. Jeannie Buss, whose father paid $16 million for this franchise 47 years ago, is fighting in court to remain its governor. At level 1, your equity gives you no vote. At level 2, your stake gives you relationships, but not control. At level 3, your governance role is a backup. At level 4, you finally control a franchise. It costs billions just to enter. At level 5, the same legal control sits over a dramatically larger asset. At level 6, you govern one of basketball's most valuable properties. At level 7, you agreed to $12.5 billion, and you're waiting. NBA ownership looks like a money ladder. At the top, the money is the easy part. Subscribe if this landed. Every week I break down the systems where enough money still isn't the whole answer.